Well, good morning, brethren, and happy Sabbath to you, and welcome also to everyone joining us here today on Zoom as well. Now, the last couple of times that I've been up here, we've been going through a series entitled The Geography of the Holy Land to better appreciate the geographical background of the stories of the Bible and the land that God chose himself for his chosen people. Now, so far we've covered the north of Israel and central Israel, and today we're going to explore southwest Israel. Now, I was originally planning on covering all of southern Israel in one message, but after I'd finished preparing it, it was basically enough for two sermons. So today we're just going to look at southwest Israel, and in the next message we'll explore southeast Israel. Now, in this part of the series on southwest Israel, we're going to explore two different regions. Now, the first region will be the southern part of the coastal plain, which is known as Philistia, because the Philistines were dominant in this part of the land until the time of the Babylonian captivity. Now, the other region we'll look at is called the Shephelah, a Hebrew word that means lowlands. Now, the Shephelah consists of the smaller foothills and the valleys between the coastal plain and the central highlands. Now, the southern coastal plain is the part of the coastal plain south of Joppa. Now, this area was dominated by the Philistines. Now, Amos 9:7 notes that the original home of the Philistines was a place called Gath. Now, most scholars feel that this is Crete, but John Bimson has provided some solid pottery evidence arguing that they came from Cyprus. Now, the verse in Amos here implies that their major migration occurred around the same time as the Exodus, though they had been in the land at least as far back as Abraham. Now, Genesis 10 says that the Philistines descended from Caslusium, who was a son of Ham's son, Mitzrayim. Now, Mitzrayim is generally recognised as the ancestor of the Egyptians. Now, Ishmael, from whom all the Arabs descend from, had both an Egyptian mother and also an Egyptian wife. Now, the earliest Philistine city referred to in the Bible was a place called Gezer, where Abraham and Isaac interacted with the Philistines. Now, today, the site is believed to be Tel Haror, halfway between Gaza and Mareshah. Now, by the time of the Judges, there were 5 cities that form what has been referred to as the Philistine pentapolis: Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gaza on the coast, and a little bit more inland were Ekron and Gath. Now, we are told in Joshua 11:22 that in 3 of those 5 cities, Ashdod, Gaza and Gath, lived giants known as the Anakim. Now, David, after he sought sanctuary from Saul with the Philistines, was later given a smaller Philistine city to dwell in called Ziklag. Now, Ziklag has not been identified with certainty, and we'll look at 2 candidates today. A new site that has been well favoured is Kibbutz El-Arai, which is just northwest of Lachish, which is actually technically in the Shephelah rather than the coastal plain. And the other candidate for Ziklag is Tel Sirah, east of Gerar in the southeast of the coastal plain. Now, we'll also look at one other coastal plain site called Tel Hessi, which played an important part in the history of archaeology. Now, despite being populated by the Philistines for much of the Old Testament period, the whole area of the south coastal plain, including today's Gaza Strip, was allotted to the tribe of Judah. Now, the Philistines were conquered and deported from the coastal plain like the Jews were by the Babylonians, and we hear nothing about them in the time of the New Testament. Now, there were 2 main ancient roads that ran through the southern coastal plain of Philistia. Now, the one in red here was the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea, and that was the international highway that connected Egypt with Mesopotamia. Now, there's also an inland road shown in gold here that ran parallel with the Via Maris. Now, it branched off at Aphek and then went through the Philistine cities of Ekron and Gath. Now, I've also noted here the Philistine town of Timnah, just east of Ekron in the Sorek Valley. Now, this is where Samson's unknown wife, Philistine wife, came from. Now, if you remember in the story of Samson at his wedding feast, Samson bet 30 sets of clothes that the Philistines couldn't answer his riddle. Now, after threatening his wife for the answer, Samson, after losing the bet, killed 30 men in his anger for their clothes to pay off the bet. Now, to get an idea of how irrational his anger could be, look at where Ashkelon is in relation to Timnah. Now, whichever way he went to Ashkelon, he had to go through two other Philistine cities to get there, Ekron and either Ashdod or Gath. Now, on the map on the right, you can see the path that the Ark of the Covenant took after the Philistines captured it at Aphek. Now, it first went to Ashdod, where it was placed at the temple of Dagon. Then later it went to Gath, then up to Ekron, before they placed it on a cart where the cows then took it all the way up to Beth Shemesh. Now, Gezer was the first Philistine city mentioned in the Bible. Now, most scholars identify Gezer with Tel Haror, which was about halfway between Gaza and Mareshah on the banks of Nahal Gezer. Now, Abraham and Isaac both stayed at Gezer at different times to feed their flocks from the better pasture that was there compared with Hebron and Beersheba. Now, both of them also passed their wife off as their sister, leading to complications with two of Gezer's Philistine kings, both of whom were named Abimelech. Now, what is the most astonishing part of the story with Abraham here at Gezer is just how old Sarah was. She was 90 years old. Now, Abimelech was still taken enough with Sarah's beauty to take her into his harem at her age, just as the Pharaoh did some 25 years earlier. Now, she must have been quite stunning to have had that sort of an effect on men. Now, Ashdod was the most northerly of the main Philistine cities, about 20 miles or 35 kilometres south of today's Tel Aviv. Now, the main city was about 1 kilometre inland, but attached to it was a port today called Ashdod Yan, meaning Ashdod by the sea, where a much later castle sits over more ancient ruins. Now, after capturing the Ark of the Covenant from the Israelites, the Philistines took it to Ashdod and placed it here at the temple of Dagon. Now, the next morning, Dagon was found prostrate before the ark. Now, the people of Ashdod were then smitten with boils, and a plague of mice was sent over the land. And after that, they then sent the ark over to Gath. Now, Ashdod was one of those 5 major cities of the Philistines situated between Ashdod and Gaza. Now, the city was built on a sandstone ridge protected by 15-metre or 50-foot high ramparts and a deep moat. Now, the northern city gate, the oldest arch gate in the world, was unearthed inside the ramparts and reconstructed. Now, after the city revolted against paying tribute to Egypt, Ramses the Great began a siege and conquered Ashkelon. Now, Ashkelon was later conquered by Nebuchadnezzar in 604 BC, and the city was destroyed. Now, its people, as well as the remnants of the other cities, were relocated then to Mesopotamia. Now, Gaza was the most southerly of the major Philistine cities along the coast. Now, it is in today's Gaza Strip, which has been controlled by the terrorist group Hamas since around 2005. Now, I had originally planned to go to Ashkelon after going to Gezer on my last trip there in June before their October 7th attack into Israel. Now, in the end, I actually ran out of time to go to Ashkelon, but before then, I put the locations into Google Maps. And Google Maps plotted a path that went through Sderot, a town very close to the Gaza border, which actually came under attack by Hamas. Now, when I saw that route, I looked at it and said, nah, that's way too close to Gaza for my liking, and I was going to give it a much wider berth. Now, even before Hamas came along, anything archaeological in the ruins of the ancient city appears to have been destroyed. Now this is a shame, given how much it features in the story of this supernaturally strong man, Samson. Now Samson went all the way down to the Philistine city of Gaza to spend the night with a prostitute. Now when the Philistines found out that Samson was in their city, they lied in wait to ambush and kill him. Now Samson escaped Gaza by ripping off the city gate off its hinges and carrying it all the way from Gaza up to Hebron. Now, it was an amazing supernatural feat of strength just to rip the city gate off its hinges. And he added to that supernatural feat in two ways. Not only does he carry it away a great distance, but he also carries it uphill to a great height. Now, Gaza is on the southern coast, and Hebron is 60 kilometres or 40 miles away up in the southern highlands of Judah. Now, you can see the route that he would have taken in red on this map. Now, Gaza is at sea level, and Hebron is about 1,000 metres or 3,000 feet above sea level. Now, after he was betrayed by Delilah and God took away his supernatural strength, the Philistines bound him in chains and put his eyes out at Gaza. Now, he was completely humiliated as a blind slave, grinding grain in a prison there at Gaza. Now, it's in this awful state that he is finally humbled and realises how foolishly he has lived his life. Now, the Philistines hold a feast at Dagon to celebrate their capture of Samson. Now, some months have passed since his capture and his hair has grown long again. Now, Samson is brought in to be made fun of. Now, he's placed between the pillars which support the temple, and he asks God to strengthen him one last time. And then God answers his prayer, and Samson brings the whole temple down, and he dies with 3,000 Philistines who were in that temple. Now, Ekron was one of the 5 major cities of the Philistines during the time of the judges and the kings of Israel. Now, it was situated on the north-south inland road between the coastal plain and the Shephelah foothills. And it was on the entrance to the Sorek Valley west of Beth Shemesh. Now, Ekron was the last place to which the Philistines carried the Ark of the Covenant before they sent it back to Israel. Now, today it is identified with Tel Migna. Now, the photo on the left here shows it when it was still being excavated. Now, today there is next to nothing there as seen in my photo on the right, which was just such a disappointment after the ridiculously long and bumpy dirt road that I had to travel on just to get there. Now, here is a view of Tel Es-Safi, which most scholars believe is ancient Gath. Now, Gath is where Goliath came from and where David fled to in order to escape Saul. Now, the lower gate at the bottom right here is likely where David pretended to be mad when he first sought sanctuary there. Now, we were really quite amazed with just how big this Tel was. Now, that is mainly because it is built on a natural hill with limestone caves and is not an artificial Tel like others such as Beth. Now, the area around the summit here is the upper city, and it would have been where the royal palace of King Lachish would have been. Now, most people don't realise that David actually made 2 attempts to get into Gath. Now, when he tried the first time, seeing that they recognised him, David became afraid, and in order to get away, he feigned madness. So the trick to not fall captive to them when he realised he was recognised worked, as we read at the start of 1 Samuel 22. David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. Now, 6 chapters later in 1 Samuel 27, he has another fear-driven crack at seeking sanctuary at Gath. Now, the account in that chapter says that he was successful the second time round. Now, what it doesn't tell you in that chapter is that he was actually captured by the Philistines at Gath, as mentioned in the first verse of Psalm 56. Now, somehow, likely with God's miraculous intervention, David somehow managed to persuade the king of Gath that he was not his enemy, and the king of Gath later gave David and his men the small town of Ziklag. Now, it really makes you wonder why David didn't try the friendlier option of seeking sanctuary in Moab, where he had earlier taken his parents to be protected from Saul. Now, amongst the Philistines was a giant by the name of Goliath, who was 6 cubits and a span, which is 9 feet and 9 inches, or 3 metres tall. Now, Goliath came from the city of Gath. Now, he had a bronze helmet and a coat of bronze chainmail that was 5,000 shekels, or 70 kilograms in weight. Now, the iron spearhead on top of his spear was 600 shekels, or about 8 kilograms in weight. Now, there's some very interesting arrowheads in the Israel Museum today, where archaeologist Joel Kramer points to as evidence of giants in the land of Israel. Now, notice the giant one in the photo of the left compared to the small one next to it on the bottom right of that photo. Now, these are made from bronze, as you can see by the colour. Now, Goliath's spearhead, we're told about, was made of iron. Now, the bottom right photo here shows scales of bronze chainmail like that worn by Goliath. Now, this is Kibbutz al-Rai, which is a little bit northwest of Lachish. Now, further northwest, in the distance there, you can see the modern city of Kiryat Gat. Now, Ziklag was the Philistine town that David was given to live with his men. Now, while he was away from the city with his army, the Amalekites came and burnt this city. Now, David and his men then pursued the Amalekites and recovered all of the people that the Amalekites had kidnapped. Now, David was also here when he was told about the death of King Saul. Now, there are various candidates for the site of Ziklag today. Now, the main weakness of this particular site that we're looking at here is that it is in the Shephelah and not in the coastal plain proper. Now, of all the sites I visited in Israel, this one by far had the most number of thorns to contend with to get around. Now, this site was excavated by one of the more Bible-believing Israeli archaeologist, Gath, who has also excavated Kibbutz Kayapha, close to where David fought Goliath. Now, his team found a rare proto-Canaanite inscription bearing the name of Yerubal, which was the alternate name of the judge Gideon. Now, it actually probably dates to the same time period as Gideon, though Gideon himself was based quite a long way from Ziklag. Now, we know that Ziklag was burnt by the Amalekites, but David is away from it with the Philistines. Now, Gabriel here has either found that destruction layer or the remains of someone's campfire. Now, another candidate for Ziklag is Tel Sarah or Tel Shirai, that sits along the banks of the Nahal Gerar stream, a little closer to the town of Gerar. Now, American archaeologist Joel Kramer has a great YouTube video called The Place in Israel Where Archaeology Was Born, where he discusses this site here, Tel El Hessi. Now, the great early archaeologist Sir Flinders Petrie was looking at this site as a potential candidate for Lachish, which was eventually found somewhere else. Now, an eroded cliff here allowed him to actually greatly advance the science of dating levels of ancient tells. Now, Petrie wrote, at Tel El Hessi there is a deep and stratified town to work on, and therefore good scope for dating by levels. And a clear section of the town had been cut open by the scouring of the torrent, so that any level could be worked on at once. In these happy circumstances, a few weeks sufficed to obtain pottery of each age from the Amorite to Greek times. End of quote. So that's the coastal plain, and now we're going to move on to the Shephelah, or the Judean foothills. Now the Shephelah is a transitional region of soft, sloping, rolling hills cut by valleys around about 10 to 15 kilometres wide that lies between the Judean mountains and the coastal plain. Now the length of the Shephelah is about 20 miles or 35 kilometres, and only takes about half an hour to drive from one end to the other. Now the Judean Shephelah consists of 5 valleys as well as the hills between them. Now the 2 northern valleys, the Ekron and Sorek, were allotted to the tribe of Dan, while the southern 3 valleys, the Elah, Guvrin and Lachish valleys, were allotted to the tribe of Judah. Now Beth Shemesh on the southern side of the Sorek Valley was also a part of Judah and a Levitical town. Now Gezer and Beth Shemesh guarded the Ekron and Sorek valleys, while Ziklag, Mareshah and Lachish guarded the Elah, Guvrin and Lachish valleys respectively. Now the Sorek Valley was a setting for the life of Samson. And the next valley down, the valley of Elah, is most famous for the battle between David and Goliath. Now the only modern town today of any great size in the Shephelah is Beth Shemesh. Now the Shephelah, surprisingly, is a sparsely settled region of Israel today, which is quite surprising considering that it's probably the most scenic region in the south with its lovely green rolling hills and its valleys. And it's certainly my favourite region in the south of Israel. Now here's a satellite view showing the 5 valleys of the Shephelah looking east up towards the highlands where Jerusalem, Bethlehem and Hebron are. Now taking the towns of the Shephelah that guarded those roads up to Jerusalem and Hebron was really a priority for Sennacherib and Nebuchadnezzar during their particular conquests. Now on the left there you can see Highway 1 going up to Jerusalem, passing through the Ajalon Valley. Now the town of Gezer overlooks that valley on its southern edge. Now going through the Shephelah was a road that connected the valleys, which we travelled on quite a bit during the week that were involved in a dig at Tel Burna, believed to be the biblical Libnah, shown here in red in the Guvrin Valley. Now we actually stayed in a kibbutz 1 valley away in the valley of Elah, close to where David fought Goliath. Now today, Route 38 goes along the ancient road until it ends at Beit Guvrin at a T-junction with Route 35 that goes between Hebron in the east and continues on west past the modern city of Kiryat Gath. Now the word Kiryat means city, and Gath is a variation of Gath where Goliath came from. Now the town of Gezer guarded the Ekron Valley through which the road from Joppa to Jerusalem went through. Now we're now swinging around to the north where the road passed through. Now the Israelite city on Tel Gezer, coming up shortly, here it is, had a 6-chambered city gate. Actually it's the Israelite city now. And at the bottom right there it is, coming into view, is the city gate with 6 chambers. Now we read in 1 Kings 9:15 that Solomon fortified Gezer, Megiddo and Hazor, and all 3 of these cities have 6-chambered gates. Now we're coming up to the standing stones in the middle of the Tel. Now all around the standing stones of Gezer were found buried skeletons of infants, some of which were burned, showing that the Canaanites offered their firstborn to Moloch, a practice that God very much condemned in Deuteronomy 12 and verses 29 to 31. Now on the left here is a photo of one of those infant burials found near that high place. Now what is referred to as the Gezer calendar was also found here at Gezer, and it is one of the oldest Hebrew inscriptions. and it describes events of each month of the agricultural year. Now, according to 1 Kings 9:16, the Canaanite city of Tel Gezer was burned by fire by an Egyptian pharaoh and was given to Solomon as a dowry to Solomon when Solomon married his daughter as part of an alliance. Now, excavations have exposed a thick 1 metre layer of black ash where the city was thoroughly burned by fire that is dated to the late Bronze I period. Now, William Deaver here on the right shows some of the melted bricks from that fire destruction. Now, the new Archaeological Encyclopedia of Excavations in the Holy Land, in its article about Gezer, tells us the following. It says, the Middle Bronze Age 2 strata were brought to an end by a destruction that left a metre or more of burnt bricks in every field investigated. Imported monochrome, local bichrome and chocolate wares, as well as other transitional Middle Bronze, Late Bronze Age pottery, all suggest a date as late as possible for this destruction. So we see here a great fire destruction in the early part of the Late Bronze I period. Now it then goes on to say, the Late Bronze 1A is scarcely represented. Therefore, a partial desertion may have taken place following the Tutmosis III destruction. Stratum 17 of the Late Bronze 1B is also poorly known. Now, so we see here that Gezer is sparsely settled during the Late Bronze I period after that fire destruction. We see a resurgence in activity around the Late Bronze 2A and then a decline in 2B before it picks up strongly in the early Iron Age. And then the article goes on to say this about the Iron Age. Although there is continuity in the basic architectural elements, and certainly in the typical painted pottery, no fewer than 3 major destructions are evident. In the first, a large public granary was destroyed and then rebuilt. After a second destruction, it was abandoned. The adjacent threshing floor was converted into an area of fine private houses. 2 courtyard houses on the upper terrace have been excavated. Both were destroyed by fire. End of quote. So we see here not 1 but 3 destructions in Iron Age 1, and later in Iron Age 2 there are also 3 other destructions. Now the standard chronology dates this Late Bronze 1 fire destruction to Tutmosis III. Now his Palestine conquests include Gezer, but there is no record of him burning Gezer. Now the 3 major Iron 1 destructions are usually dated between 1200 and 1000 BC. Now this is the period of the Judges, though there are no destructions noted in the Bible about Gezer during the time of the Judges, only that the Canaanites occupied at that particular time. Now, David Roll's chronology, he places Solomon near the very end of the Late Bronze period in Late Bronze 2B, not in the early part when the Late Bronze 1 fire destruction took place. The Gezer destruction here falls about when the Philistines destroy Shiloh on David Roll's timeline, and he has no destruction to match the time where he places Solomon. Now, in Emmanuel Velikovsky's chronology, this Late Bronze 1 destruction matches exactly where he places King Solomon during the reign of Tutmosis I, the 3rd king of Egypt's 18th dynasty, which actually began the Late Bronze period. Now, like David Roll, his chronology would recognise the Iron Age 1 destructions as those of Syrian King Hazael and Assyrian kings Shalmaneser V and Sennacherib, and the Iron 2 destructions with the Babylonians. Now the next valley down, the Sorek Valley, is the second most northern valley in the Shephelah. Now here's a satellite map showing the key locations within the valley. Now the valley was guarded by Beth Shemesh, which is always, I find, hard to pronounce. Now this was the location where the cart bringing the Ark of the Covenant from the Philistines at Ekron stopped. Now the other locations shown in blue here all relate to the mighty Samson. Now he was born and raised in Zorah, And a memorial tomb for Samson is located there today. Now the Spirit of the Lord began to move on Samson between Zorah and Eshtaol. So this appears to be when he discovers that he has a superpower, a spiritual gift of superhuman strength. Now downstream along the valley in the top left of this map is the town of Timnah. Now between Zorah and Timnah is where Samson fought and killed a lion. Now Timnah is where Samson's unnamed wife came from and where Samson had his wedding feast, where he made a bet with the Philistines they couldn't guess the meaning of his riddle about the lion. Now probably further downstream past Timnah, closer towards Ekron, is where Samson let go of the foxes with torches strapped on them that burned the fields of the Philistines. Now up in the top right here of this map is one suggestion for the location of Lehi, where the Philistines came to arrest Samson, but he killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. Now one of Israel's greatest natural wonders is close to Beth Shemesh, and that's the stalactite caves of the Sorek Valley. Now when the Philistines returned the Ark of the Covenant following a series of plagues, the cart pulling it went straight to Beth Shemesh, which was the town that guarded the Sorek Valley on its southern side. Now the ark was placed on the great stone of Abel in the field of a man named Joshua. Now many men died after touching the ark, after which was then taken up to Guvrin. Now it was in the valley of Sorek where Samson killed a lion, married an unnamed woman from Timnah, set the Philistine fields on fire, and also where Delilah actually came from. There's the valley itself from Beth Shemesh, looking down towards Timnah. And Zorah is up there on the northern side there of the valley, which was the home of Samson. Now there's a large stone there at Beth Shemesh today, noted by the arrow in the right photo, that some archaeologists have suggested is the stone of Abel, which the ark was sat upon when it was at Beth Shemesh. Now personally, I don't put too much stock in that opinion, as the Bible says that the stone was in the field of Joshua, not in the town of Beth Shemesh itself, where this stone is. Now 1 Samuel 6 tells us how God struck many thousands of people there at Beth Shemesh because they looked into the ark. Now I actually wonder how much that scene might have looked like this scene at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now Amaziah, who was the fourth king before Hezekiah over Judah, started off well, but then he descended into idolatry. Now he became arrogant after defeating the Edomites and picked a fight with the northern kingdom around 790 BC, which we read about in 2 Kings 14. Therefore Jehoash, king of Israel, went out, so he and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. And Judah was defeated by Israel. Then Jehoash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, at Beth Shemesh. And he went up to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and silver, all the articles that were found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the king's house and hostages, and returned to Samaria. So we see here that Amaziah not only lost this battle at Beth Shemesh, but the king of the northern kingdom of Israel conquered Jerusalem, broke down about 200 metres of its wall, took a whole bunch of captives, and took everything he could from the temple and the king's palace. Now Zorah here has been waiting for me to cover this place so far in this series. So here is Zorah, the hometown of Samson. Now, near the top of the hillside where Zorah sits is a memorial tomb to the mighty Samson. I tried to get up there, but the road I took was a bit too steep, so I backed off. Now, the lower part of modern Zorah is an industrial area. Now, when you pass it on the main road through the Shephelah, actually the major building which seems to stand out more than anything else, of course, is that IKEA store you see there in the bottom right. Now, Timnah is identified with Tel Batash along the western side of the valley. And this is where Samson met an unnamed Philistine woman who insisted on rebelliously marrying. And this would also be where he had that wedding feast and the big bet. Now, when the men of Judah asked Samson to turn him over to the Philistines, he was at the rock of Etam, which possibly might be close to the Etam spring near Bethlehem, and then they proceeded down to Lehi. Now, Lehi, where he killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, is thought to be somewhere east of Beth Shemesh and Zorah, close to the Stalactite Cave Natural Reserve. Now, in between the two valleys, just south of the modern town of Beth Shemesh, is Yarmouth. Now, Yarmouth, led by their king Piram, was one of those 5 cities that allied together to fight against Gibeon after the Gibeonites had tricked the Israelites into making a covenant with them. Now, Israel honoured that covenant and defended Gibeon against the armies of the 5 kings. Israel conquered some of their cities and a few others in their southern campaign. Now, the middle valley in the Shephelah is the valley of Elah. The valley of Elah is most famous for the battle between David and Goliath. Now, 1 Samuel 17:1 says that the Philistines were gathered at Soko and were encamped between Soko and Azekah. Now, Tel Soko is on the southern side of the valley at the bottom of this aerial photo. Now, Soko belonged to Judah, and it seems that they wanted to capture it. The Philistines had come in from the west, or the left of this map, into the valley of Elah. Now, to get to Soko, they would have had to pass the hilltop tell of Ziklag, shown in the top left of this map. Now, in verse 2 it says, the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Now, the Philistines are on the southern mountain ridge near Soko, while the Israelites are on the northern mountain ridge opposite the Philistines. Now, in between them was the valley and the Elah brook, from which David pulled 5 smooth stones for the battle. I've also noted the kibbutz where I stayed with the Robertsons and Nelsons for a week when we participated in a dig at Tel Burner. So it was very cool to stay in this historic valley where David killed Goliath, and so very close to the actual spot that it is thought to have occurred. I do admit that I was a bit disappointed there wasn't even a plaque or some sort of memorial commemorating the battle. I mean, surely they could have at least built a statue of David hitting Goliath with a slingshot. Now, after David killed Goliath, it says that the Philistines fled on the road to Sharaim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. So they are heading west to Gath and Ekron along the road to Sharaim, which I've shown here in the top left in purple. Now, the word Sharaim means 2 gates, and that unusual feature was discovered at a site called Kirbet Kaifa on that northern ridgetop where the Israelites were camped. Now, that particular city was built some time after the battle. The road was later called the road to Sharaim, when it was later extended to go up the hill to Kirbet Kaifa. Now, notice Route 375 that goes through the valley and then bends north to head up to Bethlehem. Now, this is the way that David most likely would have come down to see the battle with his brothers. Now, just north of where Highway 38 crosses the Elah Brook is actually a popular spot where buses pull up, so tourists can have a look at the valley where David fought Goliath. Now, they don't usually go down to where we actually stay. Now apparently, the tourists take so many of the stones from the brook as souvenirs that they actually import stones in just for the tourists, would you believe? Now on the opposite side of that northern ridge, further north of the valley, is Yarmouth, one of the cities involved in Joshua's southern campaign in the conquest of Canaan. Now after the valley bends south as it goes further inland, past our kibbutz, it then heads down to a place called Adullam. Now we visited two candidates for the cave of Adullam where David and his men hid out from Saul. Now one was on a hill west of the town of Adullam, and the other was right next to the town. Now continuing on further south was at the very end of the valley was the town of Keilah, which David saved from the Philistines. Now to give you a better feel for the battlefield of where David fought Goliath, here is some drone footage I took on my recent trip of Israel. Now we start here with looking at the view, looking southeast to the valley of Elah from Ziklag, which was at the top left of the previous aerial map. Now on the opposite side of that road, you can see those two mountain ridges. And now we're coming up to Tel Soko on that southern mountain ridge where the Philistines were camped. Now we're looking east towards Bethlehem and the Judean mountains. Now looking east, we can see the kibbutz that we were staying at and the brook of Elah, where David extracted 5 smooth stones from. And now we're looking north across to the mountain ridge where the Israelites were camped. And up in the top left there, you can see Ziklag. And swinging back east. And now we're coming up to where our kibbutz was. Now David was full of confidence, not in his own ability, but in God's power to back up his actions when he went up against the mighty Goliath. Now to Goliath he said over in 1 Samuel 17, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. The Lord will deliver you into my hand today, and all this multitude shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's." Now here's a photo of Jeff Robertson doing his best impersonation of Goliath, getting hit with a stone that we picked up from the Elah brook. And while we were so close at the kibbutz we stayed at, we had to go exploring along the Elah brook, which was dry at the time. However, we did manage to find 5 smooth stones. Hopefully not ones that were imported. Now along the northern ridge of the Elah Valley, close to where the Israelites were camped during the battle, is the Iron Age walled town of Kerber Kaifa, excavated by Joseph Garfinkel. Now it is believed to be the Sharim noted in 1 Samuel 17. Now the word Sharim means 2 gates, and that unusual feature was discovered at that particular site. Now Adullam is a short drive further inland after the valley bends south. And we visited 2 candidates for the cave of Adullam, where David and his men hid from Saul. Now one was on a hill west of Adullam, shown on the left here. Now there was even a wall in front of it, so perhaps as some part of a fortification. And the other we visited was in the top right here, next to the town of Adullam. Now the bottom right photo is from BiblePlaces.com, which doesn't look like the one next to the Tower of Adullam. So there may have been even more candidates out there for the cave. Now there's actually a whole network of caves in this particular area which could accommodate quite a lot of people. Now here is the view of Adullam. Now our tour leader Joe is approaching the walls that surround Adullam in the top photo. And below is the view from Adullam looking northeast up towards Bethlehem. Now further south of Adullam, near the end of the valley, is the town of Keilah. Now, while he was at the cave of Adullam, it was captured by the Philistines. Now, David inquired of God whether they could successfully liberate Keilah, and God told him yes. So he and his men fought the Philistines and they liberated the town. Now, after that, David then fled to the wilderness of Ziph. Now, the next major down from the Elah Valley is the Guvrin Valley. Now, there were two major towns that guarded the valley in Old Testament times. Now, one was Mareshah on the south side of the valley, and the other was Libnah further to the northwest. Now, in the area of Mareshah, there are lots of natural limestone caves, many of which have been carved and fashioned by those living in the area. Now, Mareshah also was the hometown of the prophet Micah, who prophesied in the days of Hezekiah. Now, when we were on the top of the tell at Mareshah, I think it was Jeff who found the object in the bottom right photo. We thought it looked a little bit like an ink holder for someone like Micah who was writing down prophecies for God. Now, Mareshah was the scene of a mighty deliverance by God against an army of 1 million that came up against Judah during the reign of Rehoboam's grandson Asa in 2 Chronicles 14. Now, just imagine an army of 1 million surrounding this particular place. Now, God struck them in some powerful way, and they then fled back southward. And Asa's army then pursued them as far as Gezer and defeated them and many of the nearby Philistine towns. Now, 2 Chronicles 16:8 refers to the army as comprising both Cushites and Libyans. Now, this force was likely to have been a mercenary army of the Egyptians who often controlled both Ethiopia and Libya. Now, when it speaks of Zorah, the word Ethiopian is translated from the word Cush. Now, Cush could also mean southern Egypt in addition to the Sudan. Now, what most likely appears to have precipitated this massive show of force with an army of 1 million is that Asa revolted against Egyptian hegemony following Shishak's recent conquest and the tribute that Judah had to pay to Egypt following that conquest. Now, by the standard chronology, this event falls during the 22nd dynasty when the Libyan pharaoh Osirkon I was ruling. Now, this period is a time of relative weakness for Egypt. Now, the 22nd dynasty also ruled from the Nile Delta in the north, not the south, so this pharaoh is unlikely to be the biblical Zorah. Now, David Roll places this event during the latter part of the reign of Ramses the Great, who he also believes was the Shishak who plundered the temple during the reign of Asa's grandfather, Rehoboam. Now, Ramses did rule from Thebes in the south, and he was a powerful pharaoh, but there is nothing, not even a hint of anything resembling this great defeat in any of the records of Ramses the Great. Now, there's also no way that an Ethiopian army of that size could have passed through Egypt at the time of Ramses the Great. Now, Emanuel Velikovsky proposed that Egypt's 18th dynasty ruled a lot later than where the standard chronology places it, and he places this event during the reign of Amenhotep II of the 18th dynasty, who ruled from Thebes in the south, which may be the Cush spoken of here in the Bible. Now, Beth or Beit Guvrin was mainly occupied during Roman times and has quite some impressive ruins. Now, in this aerial photo here, you can see the junction of the Inter-Shephelah road that goes north up to Beth Shemesh and the road that goes up to Hebron, where the tomb of the patriarchs is. Now, one of the cool things about driving around Israel is seeing road signs with all these places that are familiar to us from the pages of the Bible. Now, when we were in Israel back in June, we spent a week on a dig at Tel Burna, believed to be the biblical Libnah. Now, it's about 50 metres high above the Guvrin stream here, which is that green strip that you can see just south of the Tel on the left here. Now, as we swing around towards the west, looking towards the coast, you might be able to just make out the modern city of Kiryat Gat. Now, the first area under the tarpaulin here is the gate where Andrew Dar worked. Now we're coming up to the square where Jeff and I worked. Steph and Leah were working in that particular large one. We're sitting here on the top left. And there you can see me flying the drone on the summit. And now we're coming up to the most important tent of all, the breakfast tent. Now Libya was conquered by Joshua and then allotted to the Levites. Now Libnah, as a Levitical city, revolted against the rule of Jehoshaphat's wicked son Jehoram at the same time that the Philistines revolted. Now in 2 Chronicles 21:10 it says, at that time Libnah revolted against his rule because he had forsaken the Lord God of his fathers. Now later, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, conquered Libnah around 700 BC when he invaded Judah. Now Dale here had the best find of all at the dig, finding an arrow ironhead near the gate of the city. Now there's a pretty good chance that it may have been actually lodged there from the time that Sennacherib conquered the city in 700 BC. Now we actually had a visit from the professor of the lady who was in charge of the area that I was digging at. Now he was talking about the ancient fire signal system that allowed communication between the elevated tells along the Shephelah, such as Lachish, Libnah here, and Ziklag. Now he said they actually had hopes of restoring that again, but using mirrors or laser beams instead. Now this was the beautiful sunrise on the first day over Libnah. Now all I could think of at the time is, what am I doing out of bed? Now the first day was mostly about clearing out the overgrowth from the previous season of digging. Now this is the section that Jeff and Roxy and Joe's wife Wanda were working on before and after that first day of clearing it out. Now here's a couple of creatures that were found on the first day of our dig. Now the photo on the left here is not particularly clear, but that is actually a scorpion there on the left, and on the right hand side we have a chameleon. Now while I found the archaeology interesting, the arduous manual labour of the dig was easily my least favourite part of the whole trip, accompanied by the ridiculously early starts at 5 a.m. Now it gave me a much better feel of what it would have been like to have been a slave in Egypt. Now I don't think I'll ever participate in a dig again. As they say, hard work never killed anyone, but I'm not taking any chances. Now I did, however, uncover the largest piece of pottery, half a large jar, but it wasn't of much use since we couldn't find any more pieces to it. Now Lachish was the furthest south of the cities of the Shephelah. Now we're looking here now at Lachish's 6-chambered gate. And now we're coming around to Sennacherib's siege ramp that he built to help him conquer Lachish. Now Lachish is, if not the biggest of the tells in the Shephelah. Now Lachish guarded a major road going from Egypt up to Hebron and onto Jerusalem, hence its importance. Now, it was one of the cities that Joshua actually conquered during the conquest as well. And now we're coming up to the royal palace that was built at Lachish, where the kings of Judah had a secondary residence. Now notice the absolutely massive thick walls of that particular palace. There's a few of our crew moving on there. Now the brutal siege of Sennacherib on Lachish is most famously depicted on the Lachish reliefs in the British Museum. Now the bottom photo in the middle shows the remnant of the siege ramp that the Assyrians built. Now in Hezekiah's 14th year, Sennacherib conquered most of the cities of Judah, including Lachish. Now Hezekiah bought him off with a tribute that's recorded on the Taylor prison, like that which is recorded in the Bible. Now Sennacherib deported about 200,000 people of Judah off to Assyria, which proves that he made two campaigns in the reign of Hezekiah. One in Hezekiah's 14th year, and the other 15 years later in Hezekiah's last year, because he barely had an army the next time after God killed 185,000 Assyrians in a single night to save Hezekiah and Jerusalem. Okay, so that concludes our virtual tour of southwest Israel. Now, in the next message of the series, we'll be covering southeast Israel, where we'll explore the Judean highlands, the Judean wilderness, and then conclude with the Negev. I'm due up here again on February 10, so I look forward to sharing that with you then. Thank you.